Hey guys, gals, and non-binary pals, I'm your host Hannah, and this is Under the Scrubs. I am alive and well. I bet you were concerned that I was being poisoned, but alas, Chris has not succeeded, right? Last couple weeks, my face is broken out in hives, but that's doing better, and my tummy's okay, but not flaring up. So I probably scared Chris straight when I told you guys last week that if I didn't come back, he's poisoning me. Also, joke's on him because I don't have a life insurance policy, so if I die, he's not getting shit. And he knows too, I would absolutely come back and haunt him every single day because there's no way you're moving on. Like, what do you mean you're going to marry somebody else and fall in love? No, baby. It's me and you together forever. Okay. I'm going to count that as my timeout this week just because I want to get into this. This is the last part of Michael Swango. This is the end. And yeah, let's get into it. Resources are still Blind Eye, the terrifying story of a doctor who got away with murder, PubMed, Psychiatry Online, AMA Journals of Ethics, Columbus Monthly, and New York Times. So I left you off. The police had been called. There was a naked woman that was found on East 5th Street, and that was actually Kristen Kenny. And I kind of led you to believe that she's dead, but she's actually not. She was just out there wandering around buck naked, and so she was taken to a psychiatric hospital for observation where she came to on like a Sunday, and then she was released on a Tuesday. But after her discharge home, Kristen, she was still, not feeling quite right. Her naked 3-degree night had possibly been chalked up to like smoking too much, like a nicotine in high doses, because it can be poisonous. But Kristen doesn't remember smoking that day. What no one knew, though, was that nicotine was actually a poison that had been discovered in Michael's apartment when it was raided back in Quincy all those years ago. After her stepdad had collapsed during a stress test and needed open heart surgery, Kristen goes to his bedside at the time. But then when she comes back to South Dakota, she decides then, I'm going to leave Michael. April 9th, Kristen packed her bags and moved back to Virginia. And her parents noted that she looked remarkably better than her previous visit when she was there for her stepdad. And they made note of the fact that, one, she was like open carrying a gun, and two, she wasn't wearing her engagement ring anymore. But she seemed to slip back into her old life pretty easy. She was rehired back at the Riverside Hospital. She made new friends, kept the old. One is silver and one is gold. I forgot where I learned that from, but that's when I was younger. And she wasn't feeling sick anymore. So April 22nd, though, Michael shows up on her doorstep and is back with Kristen. Her parents barely saw her or talked to her after that, and they said that it just kind of felt like she had moved back to South Dakota with the infrequency of communication and seeing each other. Now, Dr. Alan Miller, he is a director of the psychiatry residency program in the State University of New York at Stony Brook on Long Island, and he's going through resumes during the spring of 1993. SUNY Stony Brooks hadn't quite filled their quota for match day that year. So because of that, they were slammed with those who, the individuals who didn't get matched, to their preferred places. So during this period too, psychiatry wasn't a really popular choice for medicine since insurance companies limited coverage for mental health and job opportunities kind of shrunk with that as well. But a former Marine Corps sergeant who had an excellent transcript really managed to catch Dr. Miller's eye. Of course, this is Michael, and he secured himself in an interview on April 27th for psychiatry. The panel of interviewers and Michael were just yapping away. They're becoming more and more enamored with him. And then Michael slaps him with I just want to let you know that I've served time in jail. Just want to let you know. Just want to throw that out there. And this threw the interviewers way off. And Michael's like, no, it's a bar brawl. So he goes into the bar brawl story for his cover up. Oh God, this gives me the ick. He said that he sometimes forgets his own strength having been a Marine. Gag me. He brings out that paper again, giving him, that's like, telling him he's got his rights back. And he tells the panel that that's a pardon. It's not. After Michael left, Dr. Miller called 2 out of the 3 references that Michael had provided, and he was satisfied. SUNY officials didn't contact the Federation of State Medical Boards, so they didn't know that Michael's license had been suspended in 2 states. SIU and Ohio State didn't divulge their findings and history with Michael either to SUNY. June 1st, 1993, Michael is accepted into a psychiatric residency at SUNY Stony Brook, and July 1st, he begins. He introduced himself as Dr. Kirk to his colleagues, and for his rotation, he was to start in internal medicine. His first patient at the VA hospital was Dominic Buffalino. He was an organizer for the Long Island Republican Party. He was a World War II veteran, former construction supervisor for Grumman Aircraft, and he was admitted for lung congestion, but it was pneumonia. And July 1st, he's hanging out, lying in bed comfortably. His IV line's getting some, antibiotics pumped through it. He's running a bit of a fever, but he's stable. The next day, Dominic's wife, Teresa, was leaving the house to head back to the hospital when her phone rang, and it was Michael. Michael calls her and just tells her, "Yeah, sorry to inform you, but your husband's dead. We didn't expect him to expire." I mean, the day remains a blur, but Teresa later remembers hearing something to the effect that her husband had been paralyzed, and so she's trying to make the connection. How did someone become paralyzed from pneumonia? July 14th, Kristen gets a collect call from Michael. Kristen can be heard by her neighbor screaming and then sobbing for like an extended period of time. And after that conversation, Kristen actually calls her mom. And her mom, I mean, let's be real, with as good of a relationship as they had and a good a relationship any mom has with their daughter, they can hear that isolation in the distance, right? So her mom hears this in her daughter's voice. They're on vacation in North Carolina, and she's like, "Yo, come up, hang out with us, get out of town for a little bit." Kristen's like, no, I'm good. I'm going to stay here. And when she gets off the phone, Sharon, she's like, we need to go back. We need to go back and get my baby girl. There's something wrong. Al's telling her, no, relax. She's 27 years old. Give her some space. Sharon calls her sister and she's like, please go check on Kristen. Something's not right, please. And her sister told her, girl, you are overreacting. Kristen's a grown up. Relax. The next morning, Sharon knows now in her gut that something's wrong. Okay. She tells her husband, look, I have to lay eyes on her. I have to know she's okay. We need to go give her a key to our place so she at least has a safe haven if she needs to get out of that apartment. They drive to her apartment in Portsmouth, arriving around 10 a.m. and knock, knock, knock. No answer. This is weird considering Kristen works 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. so she definitely should be awake by now. But her truck isn't home, so maybe she's like out and about. Sharon and Al drive around town, see if they can spot her truck. They see nothing, and they even call her work when it's time for Kristen to be there, only to find out she had called out sick. So they head back to their place, and around 9 p.m., the phone rings in the Cooper's house, and her stepdad answers. He wakes Sharon up, throwing clothes on her, and he's like, hey, Kristen's in trouble. We got to get down to the police headquarters right now. As they're on their way down there, her mom's freaking out. Was she drunk driving? Is there a traffic violation? Do they put people in jail for a traffic violation? Bank robbery? She was struggling financially. Something's got to be wrong. A police officer meets them at the door and leads them to a second floor room, and no one is making eye contact with them. No one's telling them what's going on. Sharon is desperate. Where is Kristen? Is she okay? Why is she being arrested? What seemed like hours, but were maybe mere minutes, the Cooper's world was completely shattered and will never be the same. Kristen was found dead, shot through the chest. One note that was found at the site of her death read, I am finally happy. My greatest joy in my life has been my work. I loved my patients, and many loved me back. I never felt better than when I was taking care of a critical patient. I excelled, and I cherished it. A second note was found at her apartment, asking for some of her money to be sent to Michael. She tells her parents that she loves them so much and that she just didn't want to be here anymore. She couldn't live day to day anymore. It was such a struggle with her thoughts. She would apologize, but she isn't sorry, and now she's at peace. When the Coopers get home, they phone Michael to tell him the news, and all he does is just pause briefly and say, oh, I'm sorry, when's the funeral? So during the actual funeral, Michael is almost emotionless. And I mean, everybody grieves in their own way, but it's just really weird because after the ceremony, Michael comes up to Sharon and tells her, Kristen wouldn't have wanted all these people here. She wouldn't have wanted a funeral. But like the way he came at it was very hostile. And so Sharon, taken aback by this, she all but throws a necklace Kristen had loved and $200 at him, trying to do right by her daughter's final wishes, and Michael takes the gifts and tells Sharon, I would have thought Kristen would have handled this better. Yo, what a cuck. So life slowly crawls on, and on September 29th, 1993, Baron Harris checks into the Northport VA hospital for, hopefully, a brief treatment of pneumonia. After a few days in the hospital, Baron's wife, Elsie, comes into the hospital room, and she finds her husband restrained. Michael tells her that Baron became very agitated and he needed to be given a sedative. Okay, that's weird. So her next visit, Elsie finds her husband's room very dark. The blinds have been pulled or lowered, and Michael was already in the room with Baron, injecting a rather large syringe into his neck. Not the IV, his neck. He tells Elsie, oh, these are vitamins. And so she mentions this encounter to a nurse later on, and the nurse corrects her, telling her, yo, these doctors don't give injections, nurses do. The following Monday, Baron would be on a ventilator. I mean, can you imagine walking into your loved one's room, seeing them intubated, and then the weird-ass resident taking care of him comes up to you and says, I hope it's nothing I did. He's in a coma, and I know he's not coming out of it. He tells Elsie that Baron has already suffered irreparable brain damage, and he had her agree to a DNR. Michael sends a letter to Kristen's mom, and he tells her, hey, I think Kristen would want us to keep in touch. And Sharon does not hesitate to tell him, hell no, I don't want to. She didn't really tell him this, but she felt like Michael was partly responsible for her daughter's death. Instead, she wrote a letter to one of Kristen's good friends back in South Dakota, and she wrote that Michael was practicing in New York and included like all of his details, like return address, all of that in the letter. Well, this friend takes that letter to Dr. Talley, who was the dean of the University of South Dakota of Medicine, to tell him, hey, Michael's now practicing in New York. Dr. Talley just so happens to know Jordan Cohen, the dean of medical school at Stony Brook. So he relays to Jordan that episode of Justice Files, the ensuing uproar, and the experience with Michael. And this led to a call to Fritz Henn, he was the department chair, who turned to call Alan Miller, who is a professor of psychiatry. He's also the director of the psychiatry residency program, to tell Alan that those battery charges were actually poisoning. So Miller then calls Michael and is like, yo, we got to chat. Michael shows up and Miller lays out all of the details of what the hell has just happened. And his residency is suspended immediately and his references were re-examined. But one of the references said that the whole thing had been blown out of proportion and that Michael was innocent. Michael returns the next day to plead his case, and Miller does, kind of feel bad for the guy. So he tells Michael, he goes, the only way you're probably going to be able to practice medicine would be to go somewhere that is very desperate. That day, all of Michael's hospital privileges were revoked and he was ordered out of the apartment that was set up for medical residents. So the day Michael left, October 20th, 1993, the news had broken in the local newspaper, and that was a front page story. Elsie Harris, Baron's wife, arrived, daily at the hospital, and she wanted to talk with Dr. Kirk, but the nurse told her, girl, have you seen the papers? I suggest you take this, you go home, and you read it. Elsie bawled her eyes out when she read the paper at home. She ended up coming back to the hospital, and she wanted answers, to which she got cricket noise. November 8th, Baron was pronounced dead, and Elsie was told by a new intensivist that Baron's condition had nothing to do with Michael. So now that it's breaking in New York, the hospitals that Michael had been to, from like Ohio to Virginia to South Dakota, they're all now making statements that they're investigating cases that Michael had been involved in. There's nothing to see here, and that none of the patients were ever victims. Miller was asked to step down and, he's kind of used as a scapegoat, but Jordan Cohen would step down a few weeks later, and his parting gift was to fax every single medical school in the country a letter that talked about Michael. Like, hey, be careful of this guy. He's probably going to come to you. This is what's going on. During the week where these statements are being made, the front page story is running, and the FBI begins looking for Michael. Technically, he did lie and defraud SUNY, but he also did it to the VA with false claims, which is a federal offense. But no arrest warrant would be issued at this time. This search, though, would prove fruitless because at this point, Michael is gone. So the story hits Newport News, and this is where Kristen's parents learned about Michael's history and all of the poisonings. So Al, the stepdad, calls the Norfolk office of the FBI to tell him, baby boy, I got some tea about Michael and I might know where he is. So Ed Schrader, the FBI agent, comes in to see the Coopers as the FBI was currently building a profile of Michael. Al felt that Michael would take to Bert Gee. He was a respiratory therapist that Michael seemed to be friends with. And son of a gun, he was right. Michael was living with him, and on February 24th, 1994, he had taken a job as a chemist just outside of Atlanta. A type of chemist that worked in the wastewater treatment facility, which feeds directly into Atlanta's water supply. The same guy who has had a fascination with mass tragedy and had a history of reading books that talked about poisoning a city's food supply. The FBI learns this, and rightfully so. They are concerned as hell. So the FBI sends in a little tip to the company, and July 22nd, Michael was let go for lying on his job application. So this triggered Michael to figure out he's probably being watched, and so he disappears for a while to pop back up in November. One of Kristen's friends had gotten a call from Michael saying that he wants to leave Georgia. He wants to come visit her in Florida. He was used to venting to this friend. Her name's Tracy Dunlap. And the next day, she comes home and her answering machine is chocked full of messages from Michael. He's calling from a payphone in Naples. So she decides, okay, I'm just going to call the payphone back. And Michael freaking picks up immediately saying, he's like, hey, I've been waiting for you all day. He wants to come over immediately. And Tracy hesitantly accepts. But then she turns around and calls Al to ask about Michael. And Al's like, no. Get him away from you. Do not let him in. Unfortunately, Tracy doesn't heed this advice and lets Michael come over. They stay up late talking, and Michael returns in the morning to help Tracy move in with her friends. She was in the process of moving at the time. So he sets himself up a spot on their sofa bed, and now his little visit for, a couple days is turning into weeks later. I mean, my man is going straight homosexual. If you don't know what that is, it is like, you're really only dating somebody so you have a place to stay, because nobody falls in love faster than a man that needs a place to live. I mean, he even stays like November to about Christmas time. And when Tracy calls him out on it, he goes, well, I thought I'd stay. Like, you didn't talk to the people that were actually paying rent there. So Tracy calls Al around Christmas time to tell him, hey, Michael's basically moved himself in. And he tells her, Miss Girl, I told you to get him the hell out of there. At this point, I'm ordering you to. But ring, ring, ring. The other line is her roommate, who was a nurse in Fort Myers. She tells Tracy, girl, get your ass down here right now, because I just met 2 travel nurses from Long Island, and you won't believe this shit. This led to the ladies going to the library and getting on the, good old internet machine and reading newspaper articles, and Tracy calls the FBI. But the agent who had answered that office's phone kind of brushed her off. We're like, we're not looking after anybody with the name of Swango. And they showed Michael the article from New York, and they told him, hit the road, Jack. The next day, an FBI agent actually showed up at Tracy's hospital asking about Michael, but I mean, he's gone at this point. Michael did go back to Bert Gee in Georgia, and 3 days later, the two went to like some sketchy storage locker around like 2 o'clock in the morning, cleaned it out, loaded the truck up, and left. The FBI was supposed to be watching this locker, and the employees were supposed to call the second that Michael had showed up, but nobody did. So, an entire full year after his dismissal, October 27th, 1994, there's finally an arrest warrant issued for Michael for defrauding a federal agency by gaining admission to Stony Brook's residency program on false pretenses. But Michael at this point is a fugitive, and he is nowhere to be found. So we are going to jet set over to Africa. Their springtime is considered from end of September to end of December. So November 1994, the spring air and rain had made their way to Zimbabwe. Dr. Christopher Zashuri is ecstatic. He's there to be greeting a new doctor that's coming to the country and joining the Manene Mission Hospital. The church official, Howard Mpofu, went with Dr. Christopher to pick this new doctor up. And Dr. Christopher is still a little skeptical. He's like, I don't know how we got good fortune. This new doctor seems like too good to be true. I mean, he's going to be making like 1/20th of what he'd be making in the States. So why is he here? He also seems a little inexperienced considering he graduated medical school in 1983. So, I mean, he's got amazing academics and grades, but he struggles with routine surgery and he's never delivered a baby. And Michael brushes it off because, of course, this is Michael. He's like, no, I'm more of a neurosurgery guy, which Menene didn't have a need for that. But he was more than ready to take on a 5-month internship at the Empilo Hospital in Bulawayo to improve and, focus on OBGYN because those were things that they actually needed. So the team at the Empilo Hospital was actually really impressed with him. He became besties with one of the residents there, Dr. Ian Lorimer. They were about the same age and they worked long 24-hour shifts together. Michael really started getting involved in Lorimer's Presbyterian church. He's going to Bible studies. He's going to these Christian marriage courses, weekly volleyball. In May of 1995, his internship had ended. He wasn't too keen now on going back to the Menene Mission Hospital because it's more of a rural area. But he's like, I'm going to stick it out and eventually I would like to come back here permanently. But upon his return to Menene, Michael lost that happiness and cheerful mood. Now he was asking for a car. He's like, I want to go to medical conferences. I want to get out of town. Dr. Larson told Dr. Christopher that something about Michael made him uneasy and he did not want Michael around his kids. The nursing staff were complaining that Michael was irritable and rude to them, and sometimes he would refuse to allow them to company on rounds, which they needed to do. Murmurs start going around the hospital that Michael is racist. Michael's visiting patients in the middle of the night. He's using entrances that are unattended or rarely ever used. And staff are actually being startled when they run into him because they're not expecting him. So his weird guy reputation is making itself very known here. May 24th, 1995, just a little over a week after his return from Bulawayo, Michael goes into Dr. Christopher's office to tell him, hey, that patient, Rhoda Malambana, she just collapsed and she was found dead. Here's the death certificate. And Dr. Christopher is like, whoa, what the hell you mean she's dead? What just happened? And Michael just shrugs his shoulder. I don't know. She had been admitted for burns, but she was, responding very well to treatment. Patient Kanias Mazezewa was woken from a nap to find Michael injecting him with something. And he ends up finding himself paralyzed, unable to speak, but fully conscious. And when he recovered, he tells the nurses that Dr. Mike did something to me. He begged to be moved to a different room as he was terrified to be in there alone. At first, the nurses believed Michael's claim that Kanias was hallucinating, but Kanias said, you aren't going to call me crazy when I got receipts, ho. And he picks up a needle cap that Michael had accidentally dropped right by his bed. Okay, now nurses are like super suspicious of Michael, but they felt like those kinds of claims are too serious and too grave. And they assumed already that the doctors are probably going to take Michael's side, so they kept their mouth shut, but they watched him. June 26th, Katazo Shava was recovering from surgery on his leg when Michael came to the bedside. And his family's all around. Michael's like, hey, I got to be alone with him for a minute. So the family steps out, but all of a sudden they hear Katazo screaming. Michael hurries out, ignoring questions from family, and then Katazo's laying in bed crying. And he's telling his family, he's like, we're not going to go home together. I'm going to die. That doctor just injected me with something and I think I'm going to die. I'm not going to get home. I'm going to die. Visiting hours ended for the afternoon. And when the family had returned in the evening, Katazo actually was dead. Family's complaints were dismissed since Katazo's records didn't show that he had gotten any injections. Later that night, around 2:30 in the morning, June 27th, Michael woke up Dr. Christopher to tell him, hey, Philemon Chipoko, yeah, that guy died too. He was initially admitted for a right foot amputation and he was recovering just fine. Due to the long distance between the hospital and his home, Philemon's wife was actually sleeping on a bench next to her husband's bed, and she woke up around 11 p.m. from Michael coming into the room. She sees Michael come in, walk up to her husband, do something to him, and then leave. Next thing you know, she's being woken up by one of the nurse's aides telling her, hey, did you know your husband's dead? Early July, a pregnant patient, Virginia Simbanda, was admitted with what she thought were contractions, and she actually witnesses Michael doing some shady shit. Like he pretends he's doing a vaginal exam, but like he's actually got his hand up in there, right? But then his other hand, he's like reaching around in his coat pocket, but he's not even looking at his coat pocket, the patient, nothing. No, he's looking at a nurse that's like across the room. And so she watches him step away. He draws up a medication into a syringe, and it's like kind of white, kind of cloudy, whatever. comes back over, pulls a different syringe out, and it's like a pinkish liquid, and he pushes that into her IV, turns around, tells the nurse, hey, she's ready for, a C-section, and then leaves. He doesn't say anything, doesn't explain anything to Virginia, and within seconds, she is slammed with violent abdominal pain. I mean, the baby's trying to break free. They're kicking, they're punching. When Virginia is screaming for help, she's telling the nurses that Michael did something to me. He does the typical, well, I didn't touch her. So luckily, mom and baby girl made it out alive, but word of this spreads around the hospital and just not to the higher ups, unfortunately. A nurse's aide who worked with Michael, Edith Ningwenya, had, often defended his name, and she became mysteriously ill and died around July 17th, just shortly before her own uncle was there at that hospital getting treatment and refused it because he said he had gotten an injection from Michael that made him hurt really bad, and he left AMA. He was found dead later that day. 2 days later, Margaret Jo was found dead in her room after she had had a routine suction DNC for retained products of conception after a miscarriage. At this point, Dr. Christopher launches an investigation. He's like, what the hell's going on here? Now, the staff starts spilling the beans about all the weird, sketchy shit that Michael's been doing and what he seems to be connected with. And so Dr. Christopher calls the Zimbabwe police. The same day, they get a search warrant. And of course, when they go there, Michael's place is nasty AF. There's clothes, like dirty clothes strewn about, dirty hospital gowns. The kitchen's disgusting. Think like a bachelor pad frat bro, but like 10 times worse. Notably, there's a shit ton of drugs and substances that are like foreign to police. And when I say like drugs, I mean like he brought like tons of just different prescription medication. He's told right then and there that his practicing privileges would be suspended pending the investigation. He felt like he needed to bring these drugs with him because he was unsure, and I'm using air quotes, unsure of what would be available here in Africa. So the investigation goes on. In mid-August, Michael still isn't practicing, so he sends a letter to Davis Daklama, who's the medical director, and he's basically threatening him. He's like, if you don't let me practice medicine, shit's going to hit the fan. And with that, Michael was suspended. Davis is like, you're not going to threaten me with a good time. With all of the findings and the interviews and the circumstantial evidence, October 13th, he gets a letter telling him to GTFO because he is donezo. And then he pulls the whole, I'm going to get a lawyer. Those accusations of me killing patients is unfounded. But he still leaves anyways. So where does he go? He actually does lawyer up. And in the meantime, he goes back to that hospital in Mpilo and says, hey, I'll work for free just as long as you put me up. The medical director reached out to the Manene hospital, and since it was under investigation, they just said, dude, don't do it. So Michael's dismissal, as he was saying, was just chalked up to like religious differences between the church-run hospital and Michael. So boom, hospital privileges reinstated at Mpilo. And what happens at this hospital? Mysteriously, patients start dying. But now it's not just ones, that's Michael's assigned to, but I mean, there's patients that he's not assigned to. He just happened to also be working that day/night when these patients are dying. So as the months crawl on, no formal charges are ever brought up against Michael. He does want to sue the hospital. He does want to sue the church for letting him go, and even goes on to ask about getting paid for his current work. And the medical director at the hospital for Mpilo knew that Michael had rumors that were swirling around him. They were so desperate for doctors, though. But then he gets a call from a local reporter asking questions about Michael and the investigation back at Manene. The medical director, wants to do damage control now. Now he's worried about the backlash if this, story's, it's going to get out, right? They've got a reporter calling. So he calls the Minister of Health and Child Welfare in Harare, who in return says, no, Michael's got to go. I know what he did at Manene. That guy needs to be off this property like yesterday. So Michael's called into the director's office and let go, to which he just shrugs and says, okay. So that following Sunday paper, March 24th, 1996, they did run a story about Michael and his dismissal, but because he's doing this whole, I'm going to sue thing, they don't outright name him. But it's an American doctor, blonde hair, blue-eyed. He's going to stick out. You're going to find him. So he goes on to seek refuge from, it was a woman in his Bible study. It was her mother's house. So March 31st, 1996, Michael moves in and rents a room out from Lynette O'Hare. She welcomes him with open arms. At first, they become besties, but it doesn't take long for staff to start not liking Michael. Of course, they think he's a little weird guy. And then they start making the connection between this doctor that's being written about in the papers and Michael. And Lynette and her staff start noticing even more weird shit. Like he's hoarding bacon sandwiches in his room. He was giving driving privileges, and he had tried to make an escape to Botswana before police had turned him around. He lied about his age and his last name, saying that the 68 in his birth date looks like 53, and Swango is pronounced Swan in America. So money starts going missing, booze is going missing, little trinkets all around the house, just gone. So Lynette gives him a 2-week notice to move out. He's very nonchalant, but the next day, this would be August 8th, 1996, one of her servants meets her at the gate and is like freaking out. She's like, I don't know, Michael's done something. He seems too happy. I mean, this guy's kind of been all over the place. He had iced him out for a while, and all of a sudden, he's nonchalant, and now he's super happy. He's singing. He's playing music very loud. So Lynette tells him, no, tonight's your last night. You got to go tonight. Like, get out. She cuts him a refund for the rent, and he pieces out. The next day, Lynette found out why Michael was so happy. He had put a ton of sugar in her gas tank so her car wouldn't start. On top of all of this, he was in fact slowly poisoning Lynette with rat poison. So, little parting gift from him. Police call Joanna, a woman that Michael was currently dating, and they ask, like, hey, can we talk to him? He's been dodging their calls. He's pretending to not be home until police tell Joanna, look, lady, he needs to come down to the police station August 28th, no later. 2 weeks before that day, Michael decides, I need to get out of town on a little vacation. And you can already tell where this is going to go, right? I mean, he bounced out of town to never be seen again. When he didn't show up for that police interview and his lawyer's just sitting there waiting for him, his lawyer decides to call the U.S. Embassy to ask about Michael and finds out that guy's wanted for murder back in the U.S. Shit is about to get so real. June 27th, 1997, an immigration official at the O'Hare International Airport in Chicago is looking at an American passport, looks at the owner. I mean, the ticket says he just got off the plane from Johannesburg via London. He's going to Oregon and then to Saudi Arabia. He types Michael's name into the little system, and now Michael gets himself a private room and some nice new handcuffs because he was arrested for the fraud charges, and he was transferred to the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, New York. So when he had left Joanna back in August, where the hell had he been? Oh, just casually, he was working as a physician in Africa still. The first place he went to was the University Teaching Hospital in Lusaka, which is the capital of Zambia. He had been there for 2 months, working until the Zimbabwe authorities put an alert out for Michael. The hospital found out and canned him on November 19th, 1996. And then he sprouted up next in Johannesburg. And through this agency, he was able to secure a position in Saudi Arabia. But the only problem was he had to get a Saudi visa from the office located in the U.S. They will only let you get a visa from the country you're born in. So, with Michael now arrested, charges were filed on July 3rd, but it was unsealed and made public July 25th. Back in Quincy, the first judge who had sentenced Michael was reading the newspaper and came across an article talking about Michael's newest arrest. The FBI was reasonably confident that Michael had killed about 60 people. There's been reports from anywhere 35 to 60. He says 3 or 4. No one knows. A clinical and forensic psychologist whose specialty is in psychopathology, Dr. Jeffrey Smalden, says that any single explanation for Michael's behaviors would really just come up way too short. Michael does seem to be a textbook case of a psychopath who exhibits extreme narcissistic tendencies. Psychopaths are generally understood to be someone who lacks a capacity for empathy and may exhibit aggressive, perverted, criminal, or amoral behavior. They tend to be highly self-absorbed. Obviously, he can't diagnose somebody that he's never met before, and Michael was refusing to meet with any psychologist or mental health professionals while incarcerated because he said nothing's wrong with him. The narcissist psychopath is not motivated by empathetic concern for the victims or drive to help them, but usually a grandiose sense of self. So if you look at narcissism in a classic Freudian way, it's an attempt to compensate for early profound feelings of being unloved and undervalued. Cecilia Gardner, she was the assistant U.S. attorney in charge of Michael's case, and she was trying to figure out, okay, he's been arrested for fraud charges, but we want to get him on murder charges. So at this time, we can keep him for the fraud, and so she's trying to get the case delayed while she's building her other case of murder. She actually flies out to Zimbabwe in 1997 to gather her evidence and whatever the Zimbabwe police had gotten as well. On March 16th, 1998, Michael enters a plea deal. If he says he's guilty, he'll do 42 months for the charges, and he can avoid a trial because, let's be real, if they did a trial, they're going to definitely bring up his little stint in Africa, to the U.S. light. So June 12th, though, he appears for sentencing and he does get his end of the 42 months. So with Michael now incarcerated, Cecilia resigns from the Justice Department. She feels like she's failed to bring justice to the individuals who were murdered and harmed by Michael. Ohio had tried and failed years ago. South Dakota and Long Island said that Michael didn't kill any of their patients, but the FBI said, nah, I got time to look into this. So 3 bodies were exhumed on Long Island. Samples and tissues were collected and sent off for testing. One of the bodies, Dominic Buffalino, had still tested positive for extremely high levels of nicotine, like poisoning levels. So the FBI is coming for you, Michael. Initially, he spent 8 months in a federal prison in Florence, Colorado, and then to the Sheridan Federal Correctional Institution in Oregon on February 10th, 1999. Michael is later moved to another facility in Colorado, mainly for his own safety. Now, with the federal prison, there is no parole system. So with the credit that Michael had already served, including the time in Brooklyn, he was slated for release July 15th, 2000 at 45 years old. He would still be under supervision for 3 years, and psychiatric counseling would be available but not enforced. And he would have to, be subject to random inspections of his living quarters to ensure he doesn't have weapons or poisons. And that's where he got really upset and totally objected. He wasn't down with that. So the FBI, though, they're afraid if Michael gets released, he's going to flee immediately. So they gather all their evidence, all the bodies that were exhumed, because they had also exhumed bodies in Africa, and the samples that were tested for poisons, all of their circumstantial evidence, and a grand jury convened in the spring of 2000 to see if Michael would face murder charges before he could get out. And by golly, does he get to stand trial for those murder charges. The question behind all of this, right? The one that this entire 3-part episode has gone unanswered. Why? From a confiscated notebook, Michael writes about how he killed for pure joy of watching and smelling death. Ugh, it's gross. He says, sweet, husky, close smell of an indoor homicide. His words, not mine. He fully admits to the court that he killed 3 patients when he was at Long Island. Unfortunately, prosecutors in New York could only get him with 3. The victims, Thomas Sammarco, George Ciano, Aldo Serini, and later in his trial, he will admit to killing Cynthia McGee, the 19-year-old back in Ohio. But at that point, he wasn't charged for her death because it didn't occur on federal grounds like the VA hospital had. For George Ciano, Michael killed him literally on his day off, wasn't even on call. A nurse saw him sitting on a radiator near George's bed, watching him die from whatever he injected him with. Now, Michael gets to rot in federal prison for the rest of his life. He's locked up in the Florence, Colorado, our nation's only supermax federal penitentiary, sitting amongst the Unabomber, Boston Marathon bomber, and El Chapo. Unfortunately, he is still kicking, and he is 70 years old. And that's where we're at today. I think working in a hospital for the first time, I saw a bit of that ugly side that made me feel like they didn't really care so much about staff. And then COVID hit, and it's oh, wow, you guys really don't care about staff or patients, right? And the hospitals and insurance companies really just look at people like they're dollar signs. I mean, it's so bad we got people capping CEOs out here in the streets. I didn't realize how broken our healthcare system was until I fully jumped into it for a career. And in reality, Michael could have been stopped numerous times. And this was back in the 1980s. I mean, we're 2025. It's just getting worse. There was a study that was done from September 1st, 1990 to December 31st, 1993. It showed about 75% of hospitals in the U.S. never reported an adverse action to the data bank. The data bank was created with the goal of improving healthcare, protecting the public, reducing healthcare fraud and abuse in the U.S. by having a centralized way to look up providers and see if there's been, any adverse actions taken against them. And these hospitals weren't reporting to it. It's like they are so scared to possibly be sued. You whisper a lawsuit, and all of a sudden they're going to work things out with you, or they are clamming down on any and all information. The fear of being sued is so strong, it's outweighing the public safety, which really should be the opposite. And it's been like that since 1980s to now. Okay, you can't really have hospitals if all your patients are dead because you don't want to, punish a bad provider or hold them accountable. You would actually look better as a hospital being the one to hold them accountable versus passing them off to another hospital. And then when it hits the fan, now all of a sudden you're having to do damage control. So we are done with Michael. Rest and distress whenever you go, sir. I know way too much about the guy now, so I would like to switch gears. Next week, we are talking about something as old as the tale of time. Illnesses and vaccines. We got people popping hot for measles. Who knows what's next? Maybe polio. I'd like to go back to school for my NP one day, but I don't want to have to learn about old 9th century diseases that were eradicated a long ass time ago. But because Becky, whose credentials are posting to a Facebook mom group, she makes her own granola, weaves twigs and leaves to make shoes, doesn't believe in plumbing, and suntans her a-hole every morning to get the highest quality of vitamin D, said it changes your DNA and gives you autism. Now I might have to learn about the side effects and the symptoms of said 9th century diseases. So that being said, we'll talk about that next week. I'll see you guys next Tuesday. Okay, love you. Bye.